All right. Good morning, good afternoon. So, first off, as a reminder, we're not going to have a briefing tomorrow, Thursday, given that it's a national holiday in our host country, Thanksgiving. And I hope you all will have a happy Thanksgiving tomorrow. And on Friday, the office and the building will be open, but we will just post highlights. There won't be a noon briefing that day. The office will be staffed in case of anything urgent. And then we'll see you back here on Monday, the 2nd of December, for the noon briefing. And on that day, at around 1 p.m., the President of the Economic and Social Council, Ambassador Bob Ray, along with UNICEF's Executive Director, Catherine Russell, will be here to brief you on the situation in Haiti. This press conference is organized in connection with the ECOSOC special meeting on Haiti's Children Cannot Wait, which will take place on Monday, the 2nd of December, at 10 a.m. in the ECOSOC chamber. And at 2 p.m. on Monday, there will be a briefing by the United States Representative and President of the Security Council for December, Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, and she will brief on the Council's program for the month. Today in Lisbon, the Secretary General just now held a bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister of Portugal, Luís Montenegro. The Secretary General spoke to the press afterwards. You'll have seen what he said on WebtV, and we will share those remarks. Yesterday afternoon, the Secretary General also met with the President of Portugal, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. They discussed international peace and security issues, including the war in Ukraine and the Middle East. The Secretary General and the President exchanged views on climate action following COP29 and discussed Portugal's cooperation with the United Nations. The Secretary General expressed gratitude for Portugal's contribution to UN peacekeeping and for hosting the 10th Global Forum of the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. In a statement we issued last night, the Secretary General welcomed the announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. He hopes that this agreement can put an end to the violence, destruction, and suffering the people of both countries have been experiencing. The Secretary General urges the parties to fully respect and swiftly implement all of their commitments made under this agreement. The Secretary General also urges the parties to undertake immediate steps towards the full implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701. The United Nations Special Coordinator for Lebanon and the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon both stand ready to support the implementation of this agreement in line with the respective mandates. The Special Coordinator, Janine Hennis-Plasschaert, said that it is clear that the status quo ante of implementing only select provisions of Resolution 1701 while paying lip service to others will not suffice. Neither side can afford another period of disingenuous implementation under the guise of ostensible calm. The Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, said today in a social media post that Lebanon is in the midst of its most devastating humanitarian crisis in a generation, and that the ceasefire is our greatest hope for bringing an end to the immense suffering. Our colleagues in the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs note that humanitarian needs in Lebanon remain unprecedented, and that we need swift, safe, and unhindered access so that aid can reach those in need. The conflict has devastated lives, with more than 3,800 people killed, 15,800 injured, and nearly 900,000 displaced internally, alongside over 500,000 fleeing across borders, according to the authorities. The devastation of homes, healthcare, and livelihoods is staggering. This morning, on the first day of the ceasefire, 11 trucks from the UN Refugee Agency delivered emergency supplies to more than 3,000 people in Baalbek, including blankets, mattresses, winter jackets, plastic sheets, solar lamps, and sleeping mats. Since the 23rd of September of this year, UNHCR has delivered more than 330,000 relief items to more than 190,000 people. For its part, UNICEF continues to support children who have been heavily impacted by the conflict and is providing emergency psychological support to thousands of children and caregivers. Since the 23rd of September, UNICEF has reached more than 9,000 children and their caregivers with psychological first aid. Turning to the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, the World Food Programme says that all bakeries in central Gaza have shut down due to severe supply shortages. Bread is a lifeline for many families in Gaza. It's often the only food they can access. Now, even that is slipping out of reach. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warns of a worsening nutrition situation across Gaza. Of the total number of children admitted for outpatient treatment of acute malnutrition since the beginning of 2024, 2/3 were recorded in the past 5 months. Our nutrition partners report that between the 1st and 23rd of November, more than 3,400 children were admitted for outpatient treatment of acute malnutrition. Despite the challenges that aid organizations in Gaza continue to face, the World Health Organization and a partner, Relief International, recently established a new stabilization center for the treatment of severe acute malnutrition in Deir el-Bala. This means there are now still only 4 such centers operational throughout the Strip, 1 in Khan Yunis, 1 in Gaza City, and 2 in Deir el-Bala. In North Gaza, however, the stabilization center at Gamal Adwan Hospital has been closed since the start of the Israeli siege more than 7 weeks ago, despite spiraling needs in the governorate. New reporting from health partners revealed that only 5 out of 486 health service points in Gaza were fully operational last month. Over half were entirely non-functional, while 233 were partially operating. The health sector is grappling with critical shortages of medicines, supplies, fuel, food, and water. Despite these challenges, health partners have delivered supplies and are working to establish additional health service points in displacement sites in Gaza City, following a multi-partner assessment over the weekend. Turning to Syria, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is sounding the alarm over the impact that ongoing hostilities in different parts of the country are having on civilians and aid operations. In a statement today, the UN Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Syria, Adam Abdulmullah, alongside the Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for the Syria crisis, Ramanathan Balakrishnan, called for the protection of civilians and civilian assets, including humanitarian workers. This follows the killing of a Syrian Arab Red Crescent volunteer in an air attack on Ad-Dobasiya border crossing in Homs earlier today. Civilians were killed in this attack and others were injured. Following today's attack, all humanitarian operations and border crossings in Syria have been suspended. Meanwhile, the Deputy Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for the Syria crisis, David Carden, expressed deep concern over the impact of the recent escalations of hostilities in northwest Syria on civilians, particularly children. Yesterday, 3 boys under the age of 14 were killed and more than a dozen other children were injured in artillery shelling in Idlib and western Aleppo. All of the children were in an educational institution at the time of the attack. Our partners are trying to verify the number of people who may have been displaced by the latest violence. As of today, at least 35 non-governmental organizations report that they suspended humanitarian operations in the area. Health partners say that services are no longer operational in at least 14 health facilities, primarily in areas along the front line due to the fighting. Private and public schools have also closed, as well as several main roads in Idlib and western Aleppo. The Bab al-Hawa border crossing remains operational for aid deliveries, with 10 trucks carrying supplies from the World Health Organization, the UN Refugee Agency, and UNICEF crossing into Idlib from Turkey this afternoon. This morning, Miroslav Jenča, the Assistant Secretary General for Europe, Central Asia, and the Americas, briefed Security Council members on Ukraine. He said that in recent days, we've seen alarming signs of further escalation in the already explosive war between Ukraine and Russia, referring to the launch of a ballistic intermediate-range Russian missile that hit the Ukrainian city of Dnipro on the 21st of November. Mr. Jenča said the use of ballistic missiles and related threats are a very dangerous escalatory development. Under international humanitarian law, partners are required to take all feasible precautions in the choice of means and methods of attack with a view to avoiding and in any event to minimizing incidental loss of civilian life, injury to civilians, and damage to civilian objects, he said. Mr. Jenča added that the cost of this war is already too high for the people of Ukraine and for the world, and that we must reverse the dangerous cycle of escalation. This requires genuine political will and inclusive diplomatic efforts towards a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace, in line with the UN Charter, international law, and General Assembly resolutions. And on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine, our colleagues tell us that attacks and hostilities continued to ravage Ukrainian towns along the front line yesterday and today, with local authorities reporting scores of civilian casualties and damage to infrastructure. In the Mykolaiv region in the south, authorities reported yesterday that someone died and 3 other people were injured in an attack which also struck an aid distribution site. Meanwhile, we and our partners continue to support the humanitarian response across the country. Yesterday, a convoy delivered portable power stations, medicine, warm clothes, and hygiene supplies, among other supplies, to a community in the Kherson region. This year, we and our partners have delivered, through 42 interagency convoys, humanitarian supplies to nearly 70,000 people in communities in frontline regions in the east, south, and southeast of Ukraine. Turning to Chad, today the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, arrived in N'Djamena, the capital of Chad, where he met with the Prime Minister, Alamaye Halina, and other senior officials. They discussed the humanitarian situation in Chad and the impact of the ongoing influx of refugees fleeing conflicts in Sudan and other neighboring countries. Mr. Fletcher commended the enormous generosity of Chad, where communities are hosting hundreds of thousands of displaced people, including refugees, at a time when resources are severely stretched. Turning to Sudan, our colleagues from the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warned that fighting continues to harm civilians and hampered the delivery of assistance in Al Fasher in North Darfur. Since April, more than 400,000 people have been displaced by the violence, with some fleeing to Zamzam and other nearby sites. OCHA reports that El Fasher town is still under siege and inaccessible, although a limited number of humanitarian partners are on the ground and working with UN agencies to deliver assistance and services. The World Health Organization delivered more than 17 metric tons of supplies for three humanitarian partners last month. For its part, UNICEF has been supporting water trucking and the maintenance of operation of 120 water sources in and around El Fasher, including in Zamzam camp. UNICEF is also providing support to 6 outpatient nutrition treatment projects in Al Fasher and Abu Shuk camp. Approximately 3,000 metric tons of UNICEF's education, health, nutrition, and water, sanitation, and health supplies have reached North Darfur since January of this year. Meanwhile, OCHA is supporting relief efforts in El Fasher through the Sudan Humanitarian Fund, which has enabled our partners to provide shelter and non-food items, healthcare services, food, nutrition, and livelihood support, water and hygiene assistance, and protection services. Moving to South Sudan, where Nicholas Haysom, the head of our peacekeeping mission, UNMISS, is urging state governors to take concrete action to create an open civic and political space so that people can freely participate in preparations for the country's first democratic elections, now scheduled for December 2026. Speaking at the annual Governors Forum in Juba, Mr. Haysom stressed to state leaders who are on the front lines of tackling root causes of conflict that they must prioritize delivering basic services to their people within an effective and accountable public financial management system. In addition, he called for training to begin for the second batch of the necessary unified forces and agreements to improve security across the country, particularly ahead of elections. Our peacekeeping mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, MONUSCO, has recently provided training to 400 newly recruited soldiers of the Congolese armed forces. This took place in Ituri province prior to the soldiers' deployment in the mission area. The training included the issues of humanitarian law, human rights, and the protection of children in situations of armed conflict. In close cooperation with provincial authorities, MONUSCO has successfully trained 1,000 Congolese soldiers in 2024, including 200 from the Special Forces. In the Central African Republic, the UN and the national authorities have reaffirmed their joint commitment to addressing violence against women and girls as part of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and as the country prepares for upcoming elections. Launched by the country's president and supported by our peacekeeping mission in the Central African Republic, MINUSCA, efforts aim to tackle violence that has historically hindered women's participation in elections. The initiative seeks to increase women's voter registration and participation in local elections, with the goal of raising women's representation in municipal leadership from the current 4% to 35%. And last, in Myanmar, the humanitarian crisis there continues to deteriorate, with mounting civilian casualties caused by the conflict. 12 of the country's 15 states and regions have been impacted by the fighting. People have been forced to flee their homes in record numbers, with 3.4 million people now internally displaced countrywide, according to UN figures. Humanitarian partners have reached nearly 3 million people with assistance in the first 3 quarters of this year, but severe underfunding prevented them from delivering more aid. As the year draws to a close, the 2024 Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan, which calls for nearly $1 billion, is just 1/3 funded, having received $334 million. We appeal to member states for an urgent contribution of funds. That's it for me. Any questions? Yes, Deji.
Actually, follow up on the Lebanese and Israeli ceasefire. You just mentioned about the UNICEF's efforts, humanitarian delivery efforts to Babek and other locations. Do you have a concrete plan to expand those humanitarian deliveries during the ceasefire, this 60 days? And also, what role would UNIFIL play, or what plan for UNIFIL in these 60 days? Thank you.
Well, first of all, about the humanitarian efforts, yes, this is, of course, the first day, and just the first hours, really, since the ceasefire took hold. We're glad that it has, and we will continue to expand our operations to people in need as we gain more access. UNIFIL, of course, will continue to do its monitoring mandate, and it'll continue to report on violations of Resolution 1701, and it will also continue with the support of the Lebanese armed forces with a view to extending state authority throughout all of Lebanese territory. Beyond that, the UN is discussing with the parties how we can support the implementation of this agreement in line with UNIFIL's mandate.
Extra capacity, most likely?
Well, we'll have to see. Obviously, this is something that will need to be discussed. We remain prepared, and of course, UNIFIL remains prepared to fulfill any responsibilities that are needed. But as you know, any additional mandated tasks would be something to be discussed, including with the Security Council. Tony?
Actually, part of my question was asked with Deji, thank you. But just follow up, like today UN peacekeepers in Lebanon, they talked about adjusting to the new situation after the ceasefire. What this adjustment means exactly?
Well, we'll have to see. Obviously, there are certain needs that will, and certain expectations that will be placed as a result of this agreement. We want to make sure that the agreement holds and it can be strengthened. And how we play a role will be determined in consultation with the parties and in line, like I said, with UNIFIL's mandate under Resolution 1701. Right now, our tasks remain unchanged while those discussions continue.
One more just follow up,
Yeah.
if I may. Speaking of the consultations with the parties, the UN participated to this agreement? Like, did the UN know about it? Or they were like...
We have been in touch with the parties throughout this process, so we're aware of this. But of course, we're continuing to determine what specifically needs to be done. As you know, we've been in touch with people, and indeed, our special coordinator for Lebanon, Janine Hennes-Plashert, just got back yesterday from a visit to Israel, where she met with senior officials, including the foreign minister and defense minister. Ibtisam.
About the agreement, did you actually, I mean, a follow-up on Tony's somehow, whether you were actually, whether you saw also the details of the agreement?
We are in touch with the parties, and of course we're now aware of the agreement, and we're trying to determine how best, in particular, the special coordinator for Lebanon and UNIFIL can support that agreement.
And then, as I understood it through media reports, there's supposed to be a role that the Americans and the French are playing together with UNIFIL forces. Can you elaborate on that?
I think it's better for those respective governments to talk more precisely about what they're doing, but obviously they will have a role to play in this agreement. As you know, UNIFIL over the years has had a tripartite agreement where it mediates between the Lebanese armed forces and the Israel Defense Forces. And I believe under this agreement now there will also be a role enshrined for the US and French to be part of that process.
Okay, well, last one on different subject. The French officials say that they believe that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has immunity from ICC. Any comments on that?
I wouldn't have a comment on that. Obviously, it's for the International Criminal Court to discuss how parties to the Rome Statute respond to ICC requests.
But if that there's anyone who has immunity from ICC.
Well, again,
I mean,
since this is an issue for the ICC, I'd rather that they speak about this. There is a statute, the Rome Statute, that has certain expectations on parties to the Rome Statute, and so it's for the ICC to talk about how that is to be implemented. Yes, Christian.
Sorry, I don't know if this is something you can comment on, but does the Secretary General have any concerns about the Lebanese forces' ability to fulfill its role under the mandate of 1701 now, given the hostilities and that some Lebanese forces have been killed as well and some of their infrastructure damaged? How capable are they of this role, given they weren't able to do it before the war? Now that the war is over, are they in a better position or a worse position to do what they need to do under 1701?
Well, Resolution 1701 has expectations about the presence of the Lebanese armed forces throughout the territory of Lebanon, and we, of course, have tried to support that effort. You're right that that over the years, there's been difficulties in actually getting that implemented, but the Secretary General and Ms. Hennis-Plasschaert have made clear that, again, it's essential that Resolution 1701 be fully implemented, and we will try to do what we can to ensure that that happens. Mike Wagenheim, online.
Thank you, as always, Farhan. I'm trying to draw out a little bit. You said you were in touch, or the UN was in touch with the parties. I mean, that has a range of meanings. It could mean the UN was dictated to, or it could mean that the American and the French and other parties called and said, hey, what do you think about this? How can you help with implementing this part? I mean, it has obviously a broad range of meanings. Can you expand a little bit on what you mean by the parties were in touch with the UN during this process of building the ceasefire?
Actually, Mike, I prefer for my words to have a broad range of meanings, so I'll leave it where I kept it.
Okay, so I'll ask it in a different way. Does the UN feel it's being dictated to here in terms of the tripartite arrangement and the US and French taking over? Does it feel like the military technical committee that's being developed is going to kind of push UNIFIL out of its mandate? I mean, what's the feeling from the UN side?
Well, UNIFIL's mandate is determined by the Security Council. For that mandate to change, the Security Council would have to change it. So we will fulfill our mandate to the best of our abilities. Regarding how we feel that this is an encouraging development, and we want to make sure that we can play a role that is supportive of having this ceasefire last.
Okay, second question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Last question for you. UNESCO released a report earlier this week about social media influencers and the study about whether social media influencers are checking their facts before they publish them or even care about checking their facts before they publish them. And UNESCO, to their credit, is developing a course with a Texas university in which social media influencers can enroll and learn how to disseminate proper accurate information. To that end, on November 17th, this is last week, the Honorable Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the Palestinians, tweeted out, in a tweet that's been seen by over 4 million people, a Photoshop graphic purporting to be a Sky News report that a Gazan professor, a doctor, was, quote, likely raped to death in an Israeli prison. That Sky News report claims no such thing, not even close. And there's no link to it by Ms. Albanese. In addition to that graphic, she tweeted out, quote, the racism of Western media who are not covering this and Western politicians who are not denouncing this, unquote, is absolutely sickening. So based on this completely fake news by a UN official, I'm asking if UN officials are also offered an opportunity to take these kind of courses and make sure that the information they're disseminating is accurate and truthful as well.
Well, we certainly want to make sure that all officials who are associated with the UN, and of course I'd remind you that officials, rapporteurs like Ms. Albanese are independent experts, but we want to make sure that everyone associated with the UN also takes special care not to pass along any disinformation.
Are they offered any kind of training?
Well, obviously it's up to UNESCO to determine how they expand their program, but for our standpoint, we want to make sure that all officials take special care on that. We as spokespeople, for example, try very hard to make sure that our fellow communicators are aware of disinformation and don't pass it along.
Thank you, Farhan.
Thanks. Sharife, online?
Yes, yes. Hi, Farhan. Thank you. I wanted to ask you, yesterday, US President Joe Biden said that the US will make another push with Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, and Israel to achieve a ceasefire and hostage exchange deal in Gaza. I want to know if the UN has been informed, and do you have any information on the ongoing negotiations? And if I may, I do have another question. I know some time has passed, but there has been reports in the Greek Cypriot media that Secretary General Guterres met with Greek Cypriot leader Christodoulidis on the margins of COP29 in Baku, and they discussed the Cyprus issue. I went back to see if there are any readouts on such a meeting, but I could not find it. So could you confirm that the two met at COP29 and discussed the next steps on the Cyprus issue? Thank you.
I don't have a readout of that meeting to share with you, but I can confirm that the meeting did, in fact, take place on the margins of COP29. There were a number of meetings that took place on the margin that were short ones for which we don't have readouts.
But it was an official meeting? It was an official bilateral meeting between the two?
Well, these are what we sometimes call pull-asides. So they're short meetings, but obviously, although they're meaningful, we don't have a full readout for them.
Okay.
Regarding your earlier question, of course, we would encourage any efforts for a ceasefire in Gaza. We've talked about this for quite some time, that we need for there to be a ceasefire, we need for there to be the release of all hostages, and we need expanded humanitarian access. Yeah.
Are the parties in contact with the UN? Sorry, Farhan. Are the parties in contact with the UN regarding negotiations that are ongoing?
We're in regular touch with all of the various partners, trying to get as much information on this. Yes.
Well,
Thank you.
a clarification. You mentioned that the bakeries in central Gaza have to be shut down because due to the lack of materials. Do you mean the bakeries controlled by WFP or?
Well, all of the bakeries that are run and supported by the World Food Program and their partners.
Okay. One last question. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving. Who will the Secretary General give his thanks to?
The Secretary General is always thankful for all the efforts made by people around the world to strive for a better life. And we hope that everyone can be thankful of making it through another year and do our best to continue to work for a better world in the year ahead. All right. Have a good afternoon.